When a man pulls away, your first instinct might be to panic. You feel that sudden change in energy, that shift in the way he communicates, and your mind immediately starts racing. What did I do wrong? Did I say something? Did he meet someone else? That fear creeps in because when you like someone, any distance feels like rejection. But here's the truth, a man pulling away doesn't automatically mean he's lost interest. Sometimes it's not rejection at all, it's a test, and not always a conscious one. It can be a subconscious reaction where he's trying to figure out not only how he feels about you, but also who you are when things aren't smooth sailing. Think about it this way, in the early stages, everyone is on their best behavior. You're both showing the highlights of who you are. The witty conversation, the laughter, the fun nights out. But relationships aren't built on highlight reels. They're built on the between moments, the quiet spaces, and yes, even the uncomfortable pauses. When he steps back, intentionally or unintentionally, he's creating one of those spaces. What he's really doing is watching how you handle it. Do you unravel? Do you cling tighter, text more, demand answers? Or do you show that you have your own center of gravity, your own life, your own sense of calm? See, most men, when they pull away, aren't saying, "I don't want you." They're saying, "I need to breathe for a moment. I need to check in with myself." That breathing room is where they process what they're feeling. And sometimes they pull back to see if you'll respect that space or if you'll immediately make it about your own fear. Because here's the secret. If you can stay grounded when he pulls back, you show him something far more powerful than just your affection. You show him strength. You show him that your happiness doesn't collapse because of his temporary distance. Now, let's be honest, it's uncomfortable to sit in that space. It's uncomfortable not to know what's going on in his head. But discomfort isn't the enemy here. In fact, it's the very thing that reveals the truth about both of you. If every time he takes a step back, you rush forward to close the gap, he learns that you don't trust the bond you've built. But if you can lean back as he leans back, if you can keep living your life, investing in yourself, showing up in the world with confidence, then he learns something else. He learns that your world doesn't fall apart without his constant reassurance. That's magnetic. That's attractive. I'll give you an example. Imagine two scenarios. In the first, he takes a step back, and you immediately flood him with messages. "Hey, is everything okay? Did I do something? Are you mad at me?" He sees that, and instead of feeling pulled toward you, he feels pressure. It doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like obligation. Now, in the second scenario, he takes a step back, and you don't chase. You let him have his space. You're still warm and kind when you do talk, but you're not pushing. You're still busy, still engaged with your own life. He feels that, and instead of feeling pressured, he feels curious. He starts to lean back in because he sees that your value doesn't vanish the moment he steps away. That difference is everything. It's not about pretending you don't care. It's not about playing games. It's about showing a man that your world is complete with or without him. And the irony is, when you truly operate from that place, he feels safer, he feels freer, and ironically, he feels more drawn to you, not less. Because deep down, what men respect is a woman who knows her own worth, who doesn't hand over her emotional stability to someone else. So the next time you feel that pull back, instead of spiraling into fear, reframe it. Ask yourself, what if this isn't rejection? What if this is just a moment where I get to show who I really am? That doesn't mean ignoring your feelings. It doesn't mean suppressing your needs. It means remembering that the story you tell yourself in that gap matters more than the gap itself. If you tell yourself the story that you're not enough, you'll act from desperation. But if you tell yourself the story that you're still whole, still valuable, still magnetic, then you'll act from strength. And here's the beautiful part. If he was truly losing interest, you maintaining your strength won't change that. But what it will do is protect your dignity. It will keep you from begging for scraps of attention from someone who was already drifting away. And if he wasn't losing interest, if he was simply taking that moment to breathe, then your strength is the very thing that will make him come back with even more certainty. Either way, you win. So remember, when he pulls away, it doesn't always mean he's leaving. Often, it's his way of seeing whether you can handle the space. And the way you respond in that moment can set the tone for the entire relationship. Because when you can stay calm, confident, and centered during his pull back, you're not just showing him who you are, you're showing yourself. When a man pulls away, the first thing he's paying attention to isn't just the fact that he's stepping back. It's how you react when he does. That's the real test. He's watching whether you can stay calm in the uncertainty or whether you let fear take the wheel. And I want you to think about this in relationships. Your reaction to the uncomfortable moments often says far more about you than the comfortable ones ever could. Anybody can look secure when everything is flowing smoothly, when he's texting, calling, making plans. But when that energy dips, when his attention suddenly slows down, that's when the truth of your confidence really shows up. This is why your reaction matters so much, because the moment he pulls back, your brain wants to do the opposite of what's healthy. It wants to chase, to close the gap, to demand certainty. And from his perspective, that tells him everything about how you handle pressure. Do you suddenly become needy, sending message after message, trying to fix something that hasn't even been defined as broken? Or do you pause, take a breath, and remind yourself that your value doesn't decrease just because he's being distant? Imagine him stepping away not as a punishment, but as a mirror. He's holding up a reflection of how you handle space, how you handle ambiguity. And here's what I've seen time and time again. If you respond to that distance with panic, with fear, with overcompensation, you communicate to him that your sense of security is tied entirely to his behavior. That's not attractive. That's not inspiring confidence in him. What it tells him is, if I don't constantly reassure her, she unravels. And that's not a dynamic that feels healthy for a man to lean into long term. On the other hand, if he steps back and you can still show up with grace, with calm, with a grounded energy, you communicate something completely different. You're telling him, I want you, but I don't need to chase you. I care, but I'm not going to beg for your attention. I have a life, I have value, and I'm still me, regardless of what you do in this moment. That reaction speaks volumes, because it tells him that you can handle the natural ebb and flow of intimacy without collapsing. Think about it. Everyone, men and women alike, test each other in subtle ways. And often it's not conscious. It's not like he's sitting there thinking, I'm going to step back to see if she'll chase me. It's more instinctive. He's pulled back for his own reasons, maybe because of stress, maybe because he's evaluating his feelings, maybe because he just needs to breathe. But once he does it, your reaction becomes a signal to him, and depending on what you show in that moment, he'll decide whether this is a relationship that can handle real life challenges, or if it's one that only works when everything feels perfect. And here's where a lot of people go wrong. They think that showing they care means proving it in that moment. Over-explaining, over-texting, over-asking. But often, That energy backfires because instead of making him feel secure, it makes him feel suffocated. He starts to feel that the relationship is built on constant reassurance instead of trust. Whereas if you can lean back, stay warm but not pushy, stay available but not desperate, he experiences your reaction as confidence. And confidence is what makes someone want to lean back in. Let me paint a picture. Let's say he doesn't text you for a couple of days. Your anxiety rises. You want to reach out, not once, not twice, but 5 times in a row. That urge is real. I'm not saying it's easy to resist, but every time you press send in that state of fear, you're reinforcing a dynamic where you're the one chasing his attention. Now, imagine instead that he goes quiet for a couple of days, and you let him. You live your life. You go to the gym, you meet your friends, you focus on your own projects. And when he does reach back out, you don't respond with bitterness or accusation, but with a lightness that says, "I've been good." That doesn't just show him you can handle space. It also makes him realize that if he wants to be part of your life, he has to step up and bring consistent energy, because you're not waiting around for scraps. That's the power of your reaction. You're not just reacting to him, you're teaching him how to treat you. You're teaching him what kind of energy is required to earn your time and attention. And that lesson, whether you realize it or not, is being delivered every time you decide how to respond to his distance. So when he pulls away, instead of asking yourself, "What do I do to pull him back?" try asking, "What do I want to show him about me right now?" That shift changes everything. Because if what you show is strength, calmness, independence, you set the tone for the entire relationship moving forward. He begins to see you not just as someone he likes, but as someone he respects. And at the end of the day, that respect is the foundation that makes attraction last. Because the truth is, when he pulls away, he's not only pulling back to figure out his feelings, he's pulling back to see yours. Well, one of the most powerful things you can ever show in a relationship is that you are emotionally independent. And I don't mean cold, detached, or pretending not to care. I mean showing that you have your own center of gravity, that your happiness, your confidence, your sense of self-worth isn't entirely reliant on what someone else is doing or not doing. When a man pulls away, this is exactly what he's testing, even if he doesn't realize it. He's looking to see, can she stand strong on her own, or is her whole world tied up in me? Emotional independence is attractive because it communicates something so important, that being with you is a choice, not a responsibility. Think about that for a second. If he feels like your joy, your peace of mind, your sense of security depends entirely on him, he's not experiencing love, he's experiencing pressure. And pressure, over time, doesn't bring people closer, it pushes them away. But when he sees that you have your own balance, that your life doesn't fall apart in his absence, then being with you feels lighter, freer. It feels like something he gets to choose, not something he has to maintain in order to keep you from falling apart. This doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you don't have needs or that you never want closeness. Of course you do. You're human. But it means that you can be okay even when things aren't perfect, that your emotions don't swing wildly based on his every action. That steadiness is magnetic because it signals to him that you're someone who can handle the ups and downs of life without making him responsible for all of it. Let me give you an example. Imagine a man is going through stress, maybe with work, maybe with family, and he naturally takes a step back to deal with it. If you're emotionally dependent, you'll immediately feel abandoned. You'll read his stress as rejection, and you'll rush in with demands. Why aren't you talking to me? Why don't you want to see me? What's going on with us? From his perspective, that makes his stress heavier, not lighter. It adds another burden onto his plate. But if you're emotionally independent, you might feel that space, yes, but you don't fall apart because of it. You still keep your own life moving forward, and when you do connect, you bring presence and calm, not panic. That changes everything. Because when a man sees that you can stand strong on your own, he doesn't feel like he has to protect you from every little thing. He doesn't feel like your mood will shatter if he's not constantly there. Instead, he sees a partner, someone who enhances his life, not someone who drains it. And that's the distinction that makes men step up, not because you demanded it, but because he actually wants to. He knows he's with someone who doesn't need him for survival, but who chooses him out of desire. That difference is profound. Now, a lot of people hear emotional independence, and they think it means being distant, being aloof, playing hard to get. That's not it. Emotional independence isn't about withholding love. It's about having enough love for yourself that you don't crumble without someone else's validation. It means being able to give freely because you're not terrified of what happens if it's not reciprocated in the exact way you want, in the exact moment you want. That's the kind of love that feels real and grounded. Here's the thing, when you show emotional independence, it also filters out the wrong people faster. Because the ones who are looking for someone to control, someone who's going to revolve their entire life around them, won't be attracted to it. They'll lose interest. And that's a blessing. You don't want a man who only feels powerful when you're needy. You want a man who feels inspired by your strength, who admires that you're whole on your own, and who chooses to build something with you because of it. And when he does pull away, which every man will do at some point, you'll notice the difference in how you experience it. If you're emotionally dependent, the pull back feels like the end of the world. It triggers every fear of abandonment you've ever had. But if you're emotionally independent, the pull back still stings, but it doesn't define you. You don't make it about your worth. You understand that his actions say more about where he is than about your value. And from that mindset, you're able to respond with grace instead of desperation. That's why emotional independence isn't just attractive, it's essential. It protects your dignity. It keeps you from begging for attention. It reminds you that you bring value to the table regardless of what someone else is doing. And paradoxically, when you stand in that space of independence, it makes a man more likely to lean in because he feels drawn to the strength you radiate. So when you feel that distance, instead of asking, "How do I get him to come closer?" ask yourself, "How do I stay rooted in my own worth, no matter what?" Because if you can answer that, you'll realize you don't just keep your power, you actually amplify it. Because the man who's right for you isn't looking for someone who can't survive without him. He's looking for someone who's already whole and chooses him anyway. When a man pulls away, one of the biggest things he's unconsciously paying attention to is your boundaries. And I don't mean boundaries in a cold or rigid way, like a set of rules you hand him on day one. I mean the quiet, powerful way you show him what you will and won't tolerate through your actions, not just your words. Because the truth is, when someone tests you with distance, what they're often really finding out is whether you respect yourself enough to hold your ground. A boundary isn't about shutting someone out. It's about showing them the standard of treatment that you accept in your life. It's saying, I can be compassionate and understanding, but I will not lower my value just to keep you close. And that matters because when a man pulls away, he's essentially creating a moment of imbalance. He's stepping back, and the natural instinct for many women is to fill that gap immediately, to lean in harder, to try to overcompensate so the connection doesn't slip away. But here's the problem with that. When you erase the space he created without hesitation, you're showing him that your need to keep him close is stronger than your need to honor yourself. Let me give you an example. Say he stops texting for a few days without explanation. You feel the anxiety rising, and you think, if I don't reach out, he might forget about me. So you send him message after message, trying to pull him back in. You're not setting a boundary. You're erasing one. You're telling him, you can go silent and I'll chase you anyway. That communicates that you're more afraid of losing him than you are committed to respecting yourself. And once that dynamic is set, it's very hard to reverse. Now picture the alternative. He pulls back. He doesn't text for a few days. You notice it, of course, but you don't panic. You don't start filling the silence with desperate energy. Instead, you continue with your life, and when he does eventually reach out, you don't ignore him or play games, but you also don't reward inconsistency with enthusiasm. You respond warmly, but you don't pretend the distance didn't happen. That's a boundary. It's a subtle but powerful way of saying, I'm not here to chase or to reward neglect. If you want access to me, you need to show up with effort. Boundaries aren't ultimatums. They're demonstrations of self-respect. They tell someone how to treat you without you ever needing to lecture them about it. And that's what makes them so magnetic, because a man who's truly looking for a meaningful connection will recognize and respect that strength. He'll see that he can't just disappear and reappear whenever he feels like it without consequence. And if he can't handle that, then he wasn't someone you wanted in your life long term anyway. The beautiful thing about boundaries is that they don't push the right people away, they actually draw them closer. When you set a standard, the people who aren't serious or aren't capable of meeting it will fall off. And the ones who are serious will rise to meet it. That's why boundaries are never about keeping people out, they're about filtering the right people in. Now, a lot of people struggle with boundaries because they're afraid it will make them seem unloving or cold. But boundaries are actually the opposite. They're an expression of love, both for yourself and for the other person. They say, I value myself enough not to accept less than I deserve, and I value you enough to show you clearly what that standard is. Without boundaries, you end up with resentment because you're constantly giving more than you should in order to keep someone close. With boundaries, you create balance. You create respect. You create a foundation where love can grow without fear or manipulation. So when a man pulls away and you're tempted to drop everything just to pull him back, I want you to pause and ask yourself, what does my response teach him about how I expect to be treated? Because every action you take is teaching him something. If you chase, you teach him he can withdraw and still have you waiting. If you collapse, you teach him your sense of worth depends on his attention. But if you stand tall, if you remain kind yet firm, you teach him that you respect yourself too much to play that game. And here's what's interesting. Most men don't consciously think, I'm testing her boundaries. But subconsciously, they notice if you crumble when they distance themselves. They notice if you abandon your standards just to hold on to them. And they notice if you quietly, calmly continue living your life without rewarding behavior that doesn't deserve your energy. That reaction tells them far more about who you are than any conversation could. So boundaries aren't about punishing him for pulling away. They're about honoring yourself in the moments when it's hardest to do so. And, ironically, when you hold those boundaries, you don't lose power, you gain it. Because suddenly, the dynamic shifts. You're no longer the one waiting for him to decide if he wants you. You're the one deciding whether his behavior is worthy of you. And that is where your true strength lies. Because when he pulls away, your boundaries aren't just telling him what you'll tolerate. They're reminding you of who you are. When a man pulls away, the natural reaction is to want to close that gap as quickly as possible. You feel the distance, you sense the shift, and everything inside of you wants to lean in to solve it, to bring things back to how they were. But that urgency, that pressure to fix it right away, often creates the opposite effect. Because when you rush to close the space, you don't give him the chance to actually miss you, to process what he's feeling, or to recognize your value in his life. That's why patience in these moments is so powerful. It communicates trust, it communicates maturity, and it communicates that you don't need to control every little dip in energy in order to feel secure. Patience doesn't mean doing nothing. It means doing the right kind of nothing. It means resisting the urge to over-explain, over-text, or over-analyze every little change in his behavior. Because when you put pressure on someone to come back faster than they're ready, they don't feel pulled toward you, they feel pushed. And love doesn't grow in pressure. It grows in freedom. When you can sit in that uncomfortable space without trying to force an outcome, you're showing a level of strength and confidence that most people don't. And here's what's important to understand. When a man pulls away, he's not always sure of what he's feeling himself. Sometimes he's stressed, sometimes he's second guessing, sometimes he's just overwhelmed by how quickly things are moving. In those moments, he needs room to breathe. If you rush in with questions, with demands, with energy that says, "We need to sort this out now," you're not actually addressing the problem. You're amplifying it. What might have been a temporary need for space turns into a permanent feeling of suffocation. Now compare that to when you give him patience. He steps back, and instead of panicking, you hold your ground. You don't chase. You don't collapse. You stay calm. You keep living your life. And when he does check back in, you're not sitting there with resentment or accusations. You're steady. That patience tells him something really important, that you trust the bond enough to let it breathe. And that's rare. Most people can't sit in uncertainty without trying to control it. When you stand out. Patience also shows him that your emotions are not reactive, they're responsive. Reactivity is when his distance immediately triggers fear, and you start doing things out of that fear, calling too much, asking too many questions, making the situation about your anxiety. Responsiveness, on the other hand, is calm. It's measured. It's when you feel the space, acknowledge it, but choose not to let it dictate your behavior. And that choice is what communicates maturity. It tells him that you're not someone who needs constant management, that you can handle the ebbs and flows of intimacy without spiraling. Here's the beautiful irony. When you stop trying to rush the process often speeds up on its own, because the space you give him becomes the very thing that pulls him back. He starts to notice the absence of your energy, the absence of your presence, and he begins to feel that pull to return. And when he does, it's because he chose to, not because you forced him to. That difference is everything. People value what they choose. They resent what they feel pushed into. Let's make this real. Imagine he goes quiet for a week. In scenario 1, you can't stand it, so you chase. You text, you call, you press him for answers. When he does finally respond, it's not because he's excited to connect. It's because he feels pressured. In scenario 2, he goes quiet and you feel it, of course, but you don't chase. You give him space. You focus on your own world. And when he finally comes back, it's because he feels drawn to you, because he realizes what life feels like without your energy in it. Which scenario do you think builds attraction? Which one builds respect? It's always the one where patience was present. And patience isn't just about waiting, it's about how you wait. If you spend that time stewing, obsessing, talking about it with 5 different friends every night, you're not really being patient. You're just pretending to be. True patience is when you can continue to show up fully in your own life while he figures himself out. It's when you can enjoy your days, invest in yourself, and stay centered, even when things aren't certain. That kind of energy is incredibly attractive because it shows him that you don't lose yourself when the relationship feels shaky. This is why patience isn't weakness, it's power. It's you saying, I don't need to rush you. I don't need to force this. I know my worth. And I know that if you're right for me, you'll come closer in your own time. That energy shifts the dynamic completely. Because now he's not running from pressure. He's moving toward peace. And peace is what keeps people coming back. So the next time you feel the panic rising, when he takes a step back and you want to fill the silence, immediately remind yourself that pressure is the enemy of connection. And patience, as uncomfortable as it feels in the moment, is often the very thing that brings him back with more certainty, not less. Because when you choose patience over pressure, you're not just giving him room, you're giving yourself the dignity of not chasing what should walk toward you on its own. When a man pulls away, it's easy to see it only as his test of you. You think, he's watching how I react. He's seeing if I'll chase. He's seeing if I'll collapse. And yes, that's part of it. But what often gets overlooked is that this moment isn't just about him testing you. It's also about you testing him, because his pulling back doesn't only reveal your patterns, it reveals his character. It shows you how he deals with distance, how he respects your value, and whether he creates safety or insecurity in the connection. So many people get caught up in passing someone else's test that they forget they have a test of their own to give. You are not auditioning for someone's love. You're assessing whether they deserve yours. When he pulls away, he's not the only one watching. You should be watching too. How long does he stay distant? Does he come back with clarity? Or does he reappear only when it's convenient for him? Does he acknowledge the space he created? Or does he act like nothing happened and expect you to just fall back into place? These are all answers you get only in those uncomfortable pauses, and those answers matter. Think about it. Anyone can act consistent and attentive when things are exciting and easy. The true measure of someone's intentions comes when things get a little uncertain. If his pull back is followed by respect, if he returns with intention, with effort, with the willingness to communicate, then that tells you something important. It shows you he may have needed space, but he still values you, he still knows your worth, and he doesn't expect you to just sit in the dark forever. But if his pull back turns into hot and cold behavior, if he disappears without explanation, and then reappears only when he feels like it, expecting you to reward him every time, then you're learning something just as valuable. You're learning that this is not a man who respects your heart. This is why I say it's as much your test of him as it is his of you. Because when he creates distance, you're not powerless in that moment. You're not just waiting to see if you've done enough to keep him. You're watching to see what his distance reveals. Does he pull away and then show up with honesty and consistency? Or does he use the distance to manipulate, to keep you guessing, to keep you chasing? The answers to those questions tell you whether he's someone you can build something real with, or someone who thrives on keeping you unsteady. And here's where your power comes in. You don't have to stay in situations where his tests make you feel small. The right kind of man may pull away to process his feelings, but he won't leave you in a constant state of confusion. He won't disappear for weeks and then come back acting like nothing happened. He won't test your boundaries over and over until you're exhausted. The wrong kind of man will, and your job isn't to prove you can handle it. It's to recognize that his behavior is revealing who he really is. Sometimes we get so focused on not failing the test that we ignore the fact that the test itself is unfair. If the only way to keep someone is to tolerate endless inconsistency, that's not a relationship worth having. If the only way to stay connected is to shrink your needs, to accept breadcrumbs, to silence your feelings so you don't scare him off, then what you're really doing is failing your own test. And your test is the one that matters most. When you remember this, the power dynamic shifts. You stop waiting for his stamp of approval and start asking yourself whether his actions are worthy of yours. You stop chasing every time he withdraws and start observing what that withdrawal reveals about his capacity to show up for you. You stop seeing his pull back as proof of your inadequacy and start seeing it as a window into his readiness or lack of readiness for the kind of love you deserve. And here's what happens when you take this perspective. You stop wasting energy on the wrong people. Because instead of bending yourself into knots to pass a test that was designed to keep you insecure, you recognize the test. You see the results clearly, and you move forward with your dignity intact. The right person won't constantly test you in ways that erode your confidence. The right person will make you feel safe even in moments of distance. So when he pulls away, don't just ask, am I passing his test? Ask, is he passing mine? Because that shift changes everything. It reminds you that love is not about proving yourself worthy. It's about finding someone whose behavior proves they are worthy of you. Because in the end, the pull back doesn't just show him who you are, it shows you who he is.